I ended my marriage after discovering my wife's deceitful plans. Before we continue with the story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly makes a difference and helps us grow. Now let's get back to the story. I could start with the usual line about how I thought my marriage was solid, only to be blindsided by my wife's betrayal. But the reality is that our relationship had been in decline for a while. What shocked me the most wasn't the infidelity itself, but the fact that my wife believed I would be passive enough to tolerate her mistreatment. I guess people often confuse kindness with weakness. Let me explain. I'm Oliver Lewis, 42 years old, married to Karen, who is 40. We've been together for 20 years and have a 19-year-old daughter named Lucas, who is now in her first year of college. For some time, our marriage had been drifting. Karen had become increasingly distant and seemed uninterested in nurturing our relationship. We still had some intimacy, but it was clearly waning. I suspect it was her turning 40, combined with the fact that we were becoming empty nesters, that sent her down a path I never expected. Ironically, it was our daughter, Lucas, who uncovered the first signs of Karen's downward spiral. She came home for Christmas break, and on her last day, she needed to use a computer. I was already using mine, so I told her to grab the spare one from the closet, assuming it hadn't been touched since Karen got her new computer a few months earlier. About 30 minutes later, Lucas stormed into my office with a look of disbelief on her face. "Dad, what kind of stuff are you into?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of confusion and accusation. I was confused. "What do you mean?" "All the adult videos and what's with all the weird stuff," she said, pushing the laptop toward me. It displayed an untitled folder full of videos, most of them explicit and strange. Some of the file names were downright disturbing, hinting at strange fetishes and taboo subjects. "How do you even know about this?" I asked. "You're only 19. "Come on, Dad. I'm not a kid. When did you get into this?" she shot back, her eyes reflecting a blend of incredulity and concern. Staring at the folder, I felt a wave of realization hit me. That's your mother's computer. She's the only one who's ever used it. We continued exploring the computer, uncovering more disturbing files. One folder contained several articles about how to manipulate your husband into becoming submissive. The titles were unsettling, suggesting tactics and strategies that no loving partner should ever consider. That's when it hit me. What we were looking at had been accumulated over several months. Suddenly, the distant looks, the late-night outings, and the secretive phone calls made a haunting kind of sense. With about an hour left before Karen would be home, I had an idea. We could check out her new computer. Lucas grabbed it while I powered down the old one, my hands shaking slightly with a mix of anger and apprehension. "This isn't going to work," she said. "It's password protected." I took her hand and led her to the bedroom, which had become Karen's office. I remembered Karen once telling me about her habit of noting down passwords in case she forgot. Hidden under the desk drawer, I found a sheet of paper. It was filled with what seemed like random letters and numbers at first, but after a closer look, it was clear they were her passwords for various accounts. Using the list, we managed to unlock her new computer. As the desktop screen came into view, my heart pounded with anticipation and dread. What would we discover next? "Your mom's terrible at remembering her passwords. When she got the old computer, I suggested she write them all down and keep them in one place," I explained, opening a drawer and pulling out a paper listing the passwords for our household accounts. Lucas scanned the list, then said, "This doesn't have the password for her new computer." "I know," I replied, reaching further under the desk to retrieve another piece of paper. "This one's her secret sheet. She thinks she's clever hiding it, but I've seen her put it here before. I never needed to look at it until now." The air was tense as I snapped a quick picture of the paper before slipping it back into its hiding spot. Moments later, we were in, and we began our search. More videos and articles on manipulation and submissiveness surfaced, painting a picture that was both unsettling and puzzling. Our search was abruptly interrupted when we heard the garage door opening. In a panic, we quickly powered down the computer and returned it to its original spot. The things we found were certainly kinky, involving various forms of adult content, but they didn't confirm whether she was actually acting on them, aside from watching. Lucas swore not to say anything, but only if I kept her in the loop about my investigation. This was only the beginning. As Lucas went back to school, she grew more convinced that her mother was involved in something far more serious than just watching adult videos. She had noticed the same changes in Karen's behavior toward me that I had observed. Karen seemed more assertive, often testing boundaries in subtle ways. But it wasn't just me. Karen's attitude toward Lucas had shifted too, with more scrutiny and peculiar expectations, though in a different, subtler way. I hoped this was just a strange new interest in adult videos, but deep down, I knew there was more to it, especially with her work and other activities that suddenly seemed suspicious. It took nearly a week before I had enough time to fully go through Karen's computers. When I finally had the chance, it was while sifting through her browser history that I stumbled upon a hidden email account. Her secret password sheet wasn't immediately clear on what each password was for, but there were enough hints for me to easily access her inbox. Fortunately for me, Karen had been careless enough to leave a trail of emails. Most of the messages were exchanges between her and someone named Kimberly, Karen's self-proclaimed submissive advisor. The emails revealed long conversations where Kimberly encouraged Karen to break me down and turn me into a submissive husband. Karen explained that I would agree to almost anything she asked, never putting up much resistance. In fact, she confessed that, in most cases, I would simply give in rather than argue. As I read through these exchanges, it became clear that Karen was deeply involved in this new dynamic, one that sought to challenge the norms of our relationship. Kimberly's influence was evident, urging Karen to explore further and push boundaries I hadn't even realized I had. This revelation opened doors to more questions than answers, hinting at a profoundly transformative journey that Karen was embarking upon, a journey I was unknowingly a part of. Kimberly seemed to believe that I was a weakling, someone who would easily become a compliant husband, bending to Karen's will without much resistance. There was even a point where Karen, perhaps uncertain of her ability to control me, asked for advice on what to do if I resisted her wishes. Kimberly, ever the strategist, suggested that she should threaten me with divorce. She claimed that I would lose everything, the house, the car, and even my dignity, and end up living in a tiny, cramped place, forced to pay Karen to be with her lovers. To be honest, I didn't know much about divorce law. I had always been vaguely aware that men often got the short end of the stick, even if they weren't at fault, due to the biases in the system. But what Kimberly had said struck a chord, making me realize I needed to be better informed to protect my interests. Without wasting any more time, I scheduled a meeting with Dylan Jones, one of the top divorce attorneys in the city. Her reputation preceded her, known for her strategic mind and unwavering dedication to her clients. When I arrived at Dylan Jones's office, I was greeted by a welcoming assistant who promptly handed me a detailed form to fill out. The form asked for information about our jobs, assets, liabilities, and other financial matters, a comprehensive snapshot of our financial lives. After completing the paperwork, I sat down with Dylan, who listened intently as I explained the complex situation. Her calm demeanor and the look of confidence on her face as I walked into her office gave me a sense of reassurance that I was indeed in good hands. "Don't worry, Oliver. If you end up in a shoebox, at least it'll be a really nice one," she said, smiling reassuringly. Her confidence was infectious. People who aren't Leas often don't understand the full picture. Your wife is going to have some serious problems. Mrs. Jones then laid out a strategy that was as revealing as it was comforting. "If she divorces you," she continued, "I'm betting that so-called expert of hers never even asked about your careers. Your wife's business is valued at nearly $1 million, but the liquid assets are only half of that. We'll demand half the value of the company right off the bat. She'll either have to find a way to pay you $500,000 or sell it. Her income, when we file, will be equal to yours, so she won't be entitled to any alimony." I absorbed every word she said, trying to process all of the information and the implications of each point. "I can't officially recommend this," Jones went on, "but your house is nearly paid off. If you take out a large home equity loan and place it in a trust for Lucas's college expenses, it will keep that money out of your wife's hands. Both of you have roughly the same amounts in retirement savings, so that will balance out. If you want to pursue divorce, we're ready to help you take the next steps." "Is there any benefit to filing for divorce on the grounds of adultery?" I asked, wanting to understand all my options, each nuance and detail that might tip the scales in my favor. "Not in terms of asset division," Mrs. Jones replied thoughtfully. "However, the evidence you've gathered could be leveraged to pressure her into a more favorable settlement. If her activities were made public, it would likely damage her business reputation and standing in the community, which she seems to value greatly." Her insights were eye-opening, painting a picture of a path forward that was fraught with challenges but navigable with the right guidance. I absorbed her words, feeling the weight of the situation pressing heavily on me. Mrs. Jones, our Lee agreed to prepare the necessary paperwork and would wait for my cue to move forward. Although we lacked concrete evidence of adultery beyond the suggestive emails, it seemed clear that Karen was headed down a path of betrayal. In the meantime, we used this opportunity to safeguard some of our finances from her potential reach, setting aside funds to prevent any unexpected losses. I kept Lucas, my daughter, updated on everything I had discovered and relayed what the Lee had advised. You think she's really going to try to turn you into a submissive husband? That cheating woman? She can't seriously believe you'll just go along with that, she exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief and anger. I've enabled it, I admitted, feeling the sting of guilt and regret. I've given her everything she wanted, hoping it would make things better. I should have put a stop to it long ago. Hold on, Dad, Lucas interrupted, her tone shifting to one of strategy. Maybe you should act like you're going along with it. Do you really think she'll stop if you push back? She'll just hide it better. If you play along, you can turn it back on her and trap her, catch her in her own game. I considered her suggestion, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the despair. I like the sound of that, I replied, allowing a small spark of determination to reignite within me. I continued to monitor Karen's secret email account, which had become a window into her clandestine world. Kimberly, her so-called advisor, was instructing her to cut me off from intimacy and become more demanding. Karen was supposed to assign me more household chores and carefully gauge my reactions to her increasing criticism and control. According to Kimberly, if I followed her commands, I would be rewarded with intimacy. She advised Karen to constantly find fault in everything I did and to withhold intimacy as a form of punishment, signaling my supposed submission. There were moments when I wanted to stand up to Karen, to confront her and end this charade, but Kimberly had warned her that if I resisted, she would take a different approach and secretly humiliate me, just as Lucas had suggested. So, I played my role. I acted as the dominant husband when necessary, but begrudgingly complied with what Karen asked. My anger toward her simmered beneath the surface, and though I felt a certain relief from not having intimacy with her, I feigned disappointment when she withheld it. I knew the end was drawing closer when I read an email from Karen to Kimberly, in which she shared that she had found her bull, a salesman from one of her business suppliers. My heart sank as I realized the depths of her betrayal. Kimberly instructed Karen to experience her new bull before revealing her plan to me. I had still held out hope that Karen might come to her senses and back out of her decision, but that hope quickly faded. My anger surged when I read an email just a week after Karen mentioned finding her bull. It was addressed to Kimberly. I've had my partner in every way possible. I'm ready to make my husband submissive. The words burned into my mind, solidifying my resolve to see this through to the end. Determining the identity of this bull was surprisingly straightforward. A slew of new emails from a man named Evan Miller had appeared in Karen's inbox. He was effusively thanking her for a wonderful night of intimacy, and in the most recent email, sent just the day before, he described how eager he was to put me in my place. He seemed to have contemplated the situation and was all too ready to humiliate me, telling Karen that he wanted me to please him. Curious and a bit incredulous, I quickly did some online digging on Evan Miller. It was hard to reconcile this man with the bull role he was supposed to play. From the emails and photos, he didn't fit my preconceived notion of a bull, someone tall, muscular, and imposing. The Evan Miller I found was about 5'10" and weighed roughly 180 lbs. In comparison, I stood over 6 and weighed around 200 lbs. He was about a decade younger than me, but from the pictures I had seen, I felt confident I could physically take him on any day. Evan was a salesman for one of Karen's business suppliers, and to complicate matters further, he was married with 2 young children. I couldn't help but feel for his family, aware of the storm that was about to break. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued to monitor their communications. Evan sent a few photos of Karen in intimate moments, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was creating a digital trail of his affair with my wife. The blatant disregard was astounding. Then, the email I had been anticipating finally arrived. Karen informed Kimberly that she was ready to set her plan in motion. She believed I was ready to step into the role of the submissive husband she envisioned, and Evan was prepared to execute his part. Friday night was to be the night she would introduce the new rules to me before Evan arrived. Karen even told Kimberly that she had prepared a special gift to put me in my place. Kimberly, reassured by my previous compliance with Karen's degrading requests, assured her that I would comply. With just 3 days to prepare, I met with my liaison, who handed me the finalized draft of the divorce papers. I also managed to obtain an email address and phone number for Evan's wife. When I filled Lucas in on the details of her mother's plan, she was initially shocked, but she loved the way I intended to respond. She agreed to be on standby to assist with my part of the plan. That evening, when I arrived home, Karen was already sitting at the kitchen table, looking somewhat uneasy. I discreetly activated the digital recorder hidden in my pocket, ensuring I captured every word of what was about to transpire. Karen spoke first, her voice a shade hesitant. "Oliver, sit down. We need to talk about something." I tried my best to suppress a knowing smile. "Can I change first?" I asked casually, feigning ignorance of what was to come, while internally steeling myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. Karen quickly asserted herself, her tone turning authoritative as she leaned forward slightly. "No, you're going to sit down and listen. No interruptions." I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a mixture of anticipation and unease. I sat in the chair beside her, placing my briefcase on the floor next to me, and nodded, waiting for her to begin. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock, each second seeming to stretch longer than the last. "We're going to have some changes in our relationship, and you'll need to accept them," Karen announced, her gaze steady and unwavering. "First, I'll be seeing another man. He'll be here tonight for intimacy." She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Your role will be to clean me up afterward and get him ready for round two. You'll also continue with your usual chores and follow my instructions," she added, her voice carrying an edge of finality as she paused to let her words sink in. I couldn't resist asking, "Is that all?" It was a question as much as it was a plea for clarity in this unexpected situation. "No," she replied, her expression softening just a fraction. "I have a little surprise for you. It's something you'll wear all the time, and I'll be the only one with the key. Go ahead and open it." Her hand slid a small, wrapped box across the table to me. It was elegantly wrapped, the bow perfectly tied, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. Inside was a chastity cage. I recognized it from some of the videos Karen had shown me, each one a brief glimpse into a world I had never imagined stepping into. I held it up, turning it over in my hands, my mind racing with confusion and disbelief. "Is that all?" I asked again, still processing the unexpected turn our conversation had taken. "Yes, this will be a big change, but you'll adapt," she said, a slight nervousness creeping into her voice for the first time. There was a vulnerability there, as if she was bracing herself for a reaction she couldn't predict. Karen continued, "I should warn you, though, if you don't agree to this, there will be consequences." Her eyes met mine, searching for understanding or perhaps acceptance. I couldn't help myself and let out a quiet laugh, more out of incredulity than amusement. "Are you done?" I asked, trying to gauge the seriousness of her proposal. She nodded, her confidence wavering, her eyes reflecting a mix of determination and uncertainty. "Isn't this the part where you tell me that if I don't comply, you'll divorce me and I'll be left with nothing?" I asked, adding a touch of irony to my voice. "Well, yes, that's one of the consequences, so you should just go along with it," she answered, her tone now much less confident, as if she was rehearsing a script she wasn't fully convinced of herself. The room seemed to close in around us, the weight of her words settling between us like a tangible presence. I pulled out my phone, already having planned my next move with a sense of determination. I quickly sent an email to Evan's wife, ensuring the message was clear and concise, and then dialed Lucas's number, feeling a mix of urgency and resolve. "Yeah, honey, Karen laid down the law," I said with a smirk, trying to mask the frustration I felt. "You won't believe this, but she just gave me a chastity cage to wear." The absurdity of the situation almost made me laugh, yet it was too serious to be amusing. Karen, now visibly irritated and with a sharp edge to her voice, shouted, "Put the phone down. Who were you talking to?" I glared at her, an icy calm settling over me as I weighed my response. "I better let you go, honey. I need to handle something," I said, my tone deliberately flat. I hung up and deliberately placed the phone on the table, the sound echoing in the tense silence of the room. I locked eyes with Karen, my expression firm and yielding, and slammed my hand down onto the table with a loud thud, the impact vibrating through the surface. "Don't ever interrupt me when I'm talking to my daughter," I said, my voice steady and firm, each word carrying weight and finality. Karen was left standing there, speechless, clearly taken aback by my defiance. "All right, I have your attention now. Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I continued, taking a deep breath to steady myself. You've planned for some man to come to our house tonight, have intimacy with you, and I'm supposed to watch. And this is supposed to continue with me playing the role of your loyal, oh, and let's not forget the part where I have to wear this cage, and you'll have the only key. And the final part, if I don't go along with this, you'll divorce me, take everything I've worked for, and leave me with nothing. Is that what you're saying? My words hung in the air, heavy with the implications of her proposal, as I watched her struggle to find a response. Karen regained some of her confidence, thinking she still had the upper hand in our conversation. Her voice was firm as she said, "Yes, that's exactly how it's going to be." She seemed to believe she could control the situation, but I had other plans. I picked up my briefcase, a sturdy black leather one that had seen better days, placed it on the table with a thud, and opened it with a decisive click. "Karen, take out your phone and call Evan." I instructed, maintaining eye contact. Her confidence quickly started to fade, replaced by confusion. "What? Who is Evan?" she stammered, her voice losing its earlier bravado. Without breaking stride, I grabbed her phone, a sleek model with a glittery case, unlocked it using her passcode, a combination I knew all too well, and then scrolled through her contacts until I found Evan's number. I dialed it and put the phone on speaker, the room filling with the anticipation of the call connecting. "You know Evan, right? Your bull?" I asked, watching her face closely for any reaction. Her eyes widened, confirming my suspicions as the call connected. Evan picked up right away, his voice smug and familiar. "Hey, baby, how's it going? Is the wimp ready?" I interrupted, my voice steady and composed. "Sorry, Evan, but this isn't our Bobby. It's the wimp here. I have a few questions for you." I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words settle. "When you first got involved with my wife, did you mention that you were married and had 2 young kids?" I'm guessing not, based on her reaction. "And more importantly, did you tell your wife you'd be spending the evening with mine? By your silence, I'm assuming not. Don't worry, I took care of that for you. I'm sure she'll handle it just fine. Oh, and I really appreciate the photos of you and my wife. I'm sure your wife will find those useful for her divorce. I'll definitely be using them for mine. You piece of trash." Evan's anger was unmistakable, his voice dripping with hostility. "I'll kill you." "Wow. That sure sounds like a threat of serious harm," I replied calmly, my mind already spinning through the ramifications of his words. I reached into my briefcase, feeling the cool metal of my handgun as I pulled it out smoothly. Karen let out a scream when she saw the weapon, the sound sharp and piercing in the tense atmosphere. "Karen, be quiet. Now, I'm speaking to your bull," I said, my focus shifting back to the phone. "Evan, are you familiar with guns?" I asked, giving the slide of my .45 caliber pistol a sharp pull. "If you're not, that sound you just heard was me chambering around. I've been wondering what a .45 caliber bullet might do to a man. If you show up at my door, we'll both find out." The silence stretched between us, the tension almost unbearable, like a heavy fog settling in the room. I glanced at Karen, her eyes darting around the room as panic began to surface. The weight of the situation was beginning to press down on her shoulders. "Well, I think he hung up. I didn't even get to tell him I forwarded some of his emails to his boss. Did you know their company has a strict policy against getting involved with clients?" I said, my voice calm but firm, trying to maintain control over the situation. "Sit down, Karen. You're right. We do have some things to discuss," I replied, keeping my tone steady, though inside I was bracing for the confrontation that was to come. I picked up the chastity cage from the table, inspecting it closely. It was tiny, almost comically so. I tossed it toward her, watching as it landed with a soft thud. "Really? A tiny one? There's no way I would fit in that. You know that. That's just one of your many mistakes, Karen. Did you really think I would just accept all this?" Karen began to fumble, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled a manila folder out of my briefcase, which I slid across the table toward her. The folder was thick, filled with pages that represented the culmination of our life together and the unraveling that was now taking place. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaking, on the verge of tears, her eyes starting to glisten as she tried to hold back the emotion. "It's a divorce petition. Miley, a real one, not some internet experts, told me to make sure you understand that you shouldn't rely on online legal advice." I leaned forward slightly, trying to convey the seriousness of the situation. "Let me break it down for you. First of all, no, you're not taking everything from me, and no, I'm not going to live in a shoebox. Let's start with the assets. I'm sure your online lead told you that you'd get everything. That's wrong. We live in a 50-50 state, which means we both get an equal share of everything we've built together. Did you tell your advisor about your business?" No? Well, I'm asking for half of it. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, watching as her expression shifted from disbelief to something more contemplative. I remember that recent valuation when you took out that loan. Your company was valued at $1 million. I want $500,000 in cash from that in the divorce. Karen's eyes widened, her face a mask of shock as she stammered, but you know that was just to secure the loan. The company doesn't actually have those kinds of assets. Her voice was tinged with desperation, each word a plea for understanding or at least leniency. Oh, you might have to sell your business, I said coolly, watching her reaction, the cold logic of the statement hanging in the air between us like an unspoken truth. Second thing, I'm not asking for spousal support. Luckily for you, the salary you report from your company, plus the benefits you've been getting, actually match what I earn. You're making more than I do, and you know it? The room was silent again, the gravity of the situation settling in as we both contemplated the road ahead and the choices that brought us to this moment. She snapped back. There you go again, believing some internet woman. Her eyes were brimming with frustration, a fiery intensity matching her words. You see, I continued calmly, your salary isn't just about your paycheck. It includes the benefits, the car, the trips, the perks. It's a shame you'll have to sell it all to pay me back. My voice was steady, but the undercurrent of resentment was unmistakable. You son of a ack, she began, her voice low and furious, her fists clenched at her sides. You planned this all along, didn't you? No. Let me stop you right there. I cut in, my voice cold and calculated. You were the one who planned this. I'm just reacting to your actions. How's that working out for you? I watched as confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by anger and despair. Karen's tears were flowing now, her sobs racking her body as she trembled. I don't want a divorce. Can't we fix this somehow? Her words were choked, her desperation palpable in the air between us. Fix this? I scoffed, shaking my head slowly, disbelief etched into every feature. You're out of your mind. You wanted to lock me up in a cage. I don't know what happened to make you lose it, but I'm done. Just so you know, I've known about your little scheme all along. It only proves that you think kindness is a weakness. Well, I'm going to fix that for you. I won't be kind to you anymore. From here on out, I'll treat you exactly the way you've treated me. Her crying intensified, the sound raw and heart-wrenching. Oliver, I'm sorry. I just wanted something different, something exciting, and I got carried away. Please, can't we just forget all of this? I see how wrong I was to pressure you into this, she pleaded, her voice breaking. You wanted excitement? I replied, my voice icy as a winter's night. Well, get ready. Because I'm going to give you excitement. Just wait for the excitement of divorce court. It's going to be thrilling for you to tell your family what a cheating woman you've become. And the best part, it's going to be so exciting when you have to sell your business to pay me. Look at all the excitement you've got coming your way. Karen continued to beg, crying and apologizing, saying she never intended for things to get this far. Her words were a torrent, spilling out uncontrollably, her face a mask of regret. She'd been sobbing for what felt like an eternity when suddenly there was a loud pounding on the front door. The force of it was like a drumbeat, echoing through the silence, telling me exactly who it was. I grabbed my .45 from the table, the weight of it a familiar comfort, and made my way to the door. Just as I reached it, a voice shouted through the door, "Open up, you son of a—" The anger in the voice matched the fury in the pounding. I stepped back, pulling out my phone and dialing 9111. I need the police at my house right now. My wife's boyfriend is outside, threatening me. I don't know if he's armed, but I am. If he tries to break in, I will defend myself. My words were calm, but inside, my heart was pounding like a drum. I left the phone on the line with 911 still connected. Evan, you need to get away from my door. I've called the police, and they're on their way. My voice was loud enough to carry over the pounding, which grew louder as Evan tried harder to break down the door. I'm going to kill you, he yelled, the fury in his voice unmistakable, a promise of violence. For a moment, I considered unlocking the deadbolt and letting him make his move, but before I could, the sound of sirens filled the street, a welcome wail of salvation. Through the door, I could hear the police shouting at Evan to show his hands and step back. When he didn't comply, one of the officers shouted, taser deployed, and the electric crackle was audible even through the solid wood of the door. The chaos outside faded into the background as the reality of the situation settled over me, a heavy, inescapable weight. Later, we learned that Evan's wife completely lost it when she received my email revealing the affair. In a panic, she dashed over to her father's house, conveniently located next door to seek refuge and support. As a result, her father was there waiting when Evan arrived home. Evan barely managed to escape the heated confrontation with his life before rushing back to my doorstep, seeking refuge. When he was eventually arrested that night, I couldn't help but notice some severe dents on the side of his car. They looked suspiciously like baseball bat marks, probably from a run-in with his enraged father-in-law. It's too bad his father-in-law didn't catch him before he attempted to break into my house with a gun. It could have saved him some jail time and a lot of trouble. The whole ordeal with Yvonne allowed me to secure a restraining order against him, though it wouldn't be necessary until he was released from jail. I also threatened Karen with one if she didn't move out of our shared home. I knew the threat wouldn't stand legally in court, but it was enough to persuade her, and she ended up moving in with her parents, all while kicking and screaming the entire time. During the move, she kept pleading, trying to convince me she didn't truly want a divorce and that we could somehow still fix things between us. Her desperation was palpable, but I was unmoved by her attempts. Karen eventually hired a Lee who insisted that we meet in person to discuss the details of the divorce proceedings. My Lee, Mrs. Jones, was seasoned and stern. She warned me that the opposing Lee would likely try to challenge every line in the petition. She described him as a real piece of work, someone who would shout and make a scene but wasn't particularly sharp on the legal front. Her advice was clear: don't let him intimidate you. As Mrs. Jones had accurately predicted, Karen and her Lee attempted to convince me to reconsider my stance. Karen put on her sweetest, most innocent face, pretending as if she'd done nothing wrong. "Honey, this was all a huge mistake," she said, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. "I thought it would bring us closer, but you have to believe me, Evan and I never crossed that line. I didn't cheat on you." Her words fell flat, and I remained silent, simply staring at her, unmoved by her performance. Her sleazy Lee then chimed in, his voice slick with condescension. "Mr. Lewis, we're willing to let all this go, and we'll even forgive your false claims of infidelity against Mrs. Lewis. But if you insist on continuing this path, we'll counter-sue for slander against her good name." His threat was empty, and I couldn't help but laugh, glancing over at Mrs. Jones. "You called it?" I said, acknowledging her accurate prediction of their tactics. Mrs. Jones calmly opened one of the folders in front of her and slid several pictures across the table to Karen and her Lee. "I believe these will prove otherwise," she said firmly, her voice unyielding. "This one shows you pleasuring him. I'm sure that doesn't count as cheating. Here's another one of him behind you. You might try denying it, but I know that mole on your butt cheek anywhere. Oh, and here's one of you riding Evan. He's a great photographer, isn't he? Did my future ex-wife forget to tell you about these?" I paused, then looked directly at Karen, feeling a surge of resolve. "I'm not stopping this divorce. You can fight it all you want, but I'm done with you," I declared, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I pushed another photo toward her Lee, my hand feeling a slight tremor. "Here's a picture of the cage you wanted to lock me in," I said, sliding the photo across the table, its edges catching the harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room. Karen's face hardened instantly. "No, I will not forgive or forget this," she retorted, her voice dripping with anger and defiance. Karen and her Lee exchanged whispered words, a hurried conversation cloaked in urgency. It was clear she hadn't told him about Evan taking those pictures. The tension in the room Miller so palpable it felt like a living thing, but all I could catch was Karen saying, "He told me he had pictures, but I didn't believe him. I had my eyes closed. I wasn't looking at him while he was with me." Mrs. Jones, my Lee L., suggested a brief recess for the Lees to confer with their clients. As we stepped out of the room, Mrs. Jones and I shared a quiet laugh, a brief moment of levity in an otherwise tense situation. When we returned, the change in Karen was noticeable. The sweet and innocent demeanor she had tried to project was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating air. Her Lee spoke first, adopting a more formal tone. "We are going to demand counseling. It's the least we can do to salvage something from this situation." As Mrs. Jones had warned me, I wasn't surprised. I leaned back in my chair, trying to appear relaxed, and told her I can sit through as many sessions as they want to throw at me, knowing full well it was just another step in this arduous process. The Lee continued, "If we can't convince you to drop this after counseling, we'll need to discuss the division of assets. Your proposed split is completely unacceptable," he said, his voice tinged with irritation. With that, Karen's Lee produced the folder containing our proposed asset division and slid it across the table with a practiced gesture. Your demand for $500,000 from Mrs. Lewis's company is absurd. We'll need an independent evaluation of the business before we can entertain any numbers. Your company is probably only worth half that, Karen said, glaring at me, her eyes flashing with contempt. Miley gave me a knowing grin, then opened a folder of her own. She slid a stapled stack of papers toward Karen, the sound of the paper sliding echoing softly in the room. The document contained a comprehensive evaluation of the business's value, meticulously detailed to counter their skepticism. Mrs. Lewis, I think you'll recognize this as a loan application for your business, Mrs. Jones began, her voice steady and authoritative. If you turn to the last page, you'll see your signature, along with a statement where you signed under penalty of perjury. This was mailed to the bank after being notarized, and in it, you confirmed that the value of your business was just over $1 million. Based on this document, the bank issued you a loan. If you're now saying the business was never worth that much, you're admitting to perjury. Worse, since you used the postal service, that's mail fraud. Mrs. Jones paused for effect, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in, then added, I know your Lee doesn't specialize in criminal law, but I'm sure he understands how seriously the feds take mail fraud. It's not something they overlook. I couldn't help myself and let out a chuckle. Well, Karen, maybe it's you who will end up in a cage. My words were sharp, slicing through the tense atmosphere. Karen turned ghostly pale and immediately turned to her attorney, her face a mask of panic. They argued in hushed tones for a few minutes, the liais's brow furrowed in concern, before he finally declared the meeting over, his voice firm. A week later, I was taken aback when Karen appeared at my doorstep. Her appearance was disheveled, her once neatly styled hair now a tangled mess, and her eyes were bloodshot as if she hadn't slept in days. She seemed fragile, a stark contrast to her usual confident demeanor. Oliver, please, we need to talk, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying a weight of desperation. I opened the door and gestured for her to come inside. Haven't we already had this conversation? The night you tried to turn me into some weak husband? I reminded her, my tone tinged with a hint of annoyance. I led her to the kitchen table where the morning sun cast long shadows. Everything's already out in the open. What more do you want to discuss, Karen? I asked, genuinely curious about what she had to say, as I watched her sink into the chair, exhaustion evident in her every movement. I can't handle this anymore, Oliver. I was stupid, and now I'm losing everything. Lucas won't even speak to me. Every time I try calling her, she accuses me of being a cheater and hangs up. My business, which I've poured my heart and soul into for years, is falling apart, and you're pushing for me to go to jail. My parents are furious. I overheard my dad telling my mom that I'm a cheater and that he wants me out of the house. Evan's wife even showed up at their place, threatening to kick me out as well. It's as if everything I've built is crumbling around me. She paused, and then a bitter laugh escaped me. Sounds like you're finally getting what you deserve, doesn't it? Tears streamed down Karen's face as she pleaded. You wouldn't actually send me to jail, would you? We were once partners, Oliver. It's not me sending you there, I replied coldly. Your own actions will do that. Didn't you want to lock me up at one point? Seems like you lost the key to your own plans. I couldn't wrap my head around how she thought I'd ever just let this slide. The betrayal ran too deep and her excuses seemed hollow. I'm sorry, Oliver. I got caught up in the online stuff. That woman told me it was what you wanted, she admitted. She said the fact that you did all the household chores without complaining meant you liked being dominated. I didn't see it for what it really was, just you trying to keep peace at home. Karen, maybe I'm just a guy who wanted to keep his wife happy, I said, struggling to hold back the frustration and hurt in my voice. I never thought it would be seen as a sign of weakness or submission. Karen, we're done here. I'm not going back on my decision. I'd hate for you to mistake my willingness to cooperate for being weak. I suggest you drop the counseling idea and start looking for someone to buy your business. The finality in my words was clear, leaving no room for doubt about my intention. In the days that followed, Karen fired her old Lee who was known for using questionable tactics, and hired someone with a more solid reputation. Her new attorney told her straight up that she was on the losing side and advised her to cut her losses before things got worse. 2 months later, we found ourselves back in the same conference room at my Lee's office. Karen walked in looking as beaten as she had when she showed up at my house, defeated and broken. The once vibrant aura she carried was now subdued, shadows under her eyes telling of sleepless nights and endless worry. Mrs. Jones informed me earlier in the week that Karen had finally secured a contract to sell her business. After paying off her outstanding loans, she would walk away with roughly $400,000. It was a far cry from the initial offer, which was only half that amount, but we had stood firm and rejected it. We made it clear from the outset that we wouldn't settle for anything less than the full sum. This meeting today was called to finalize the financial details of our divorce settlement. Karen's Lee, a stoic man with a serious demeanor, cleared his throat and pushed a thick folder across the table to my attorney. My client agrees to the latest settlement terms, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Mr. Lewis will retain full ownership of the marital home, he continued. Both parties will keep their individual retirement accounts. The bank accounts will remain equally divided at a 50-50 split. As for Mrs. Lewis's business, there is a contract to sell for $400,000. After the sale is completed, Mr. Lewis will receive a check for $320. I'm assuming we don't need to include any reference to Mr. Lewis's agreement not to bring up the loan documentation in the settlement agreement. Mrs. Jones stood up, her expression resolute as she addressed the room. No, I don't think that needs to be in writing, she replied firmly. The next step is to file the signed divorce papers with this settlement, and then we're done here. As we wrapped up the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a slight pang of sympathy for Karen. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and as they finally spilled over, she looked up at me, her voice trembling with emotion. "Can we have a few minutes to talk?" she asked. I gave Mrs. Jones a brief nod to signal that I was okay with a private conversation. The others quietly filed out of the room, leaving us alone in the now eerily silent conference room. "I'm so sorry, Oliver," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I'll never regain your trust, but could you please help me with Lucas? She won't even speak to me anymore. Every time I try, she calls me awful names. She won't even consider meeting with me." "What did you expect, Karen?" I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check despite the storm of feelings swirling inside me. "Did you think Lucas would just forgive you for trying to control me and inviting other men into our lives? I can't do anything to change her mind. You'll have to find a way to fix this on your own." Karen lowered her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat as she shuffled out of the conference room. I wanted to ask her how she was handling the mess she had created for herself, but that felt like it would be adding salt to the wound. I had already said enough. And with that, we come to the end of today's story. Was this what you expected, or did it take a turn you weren't anticipating? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's start a conversation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. If you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join us. I post fresh, captivating stories daily, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and comment. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.